Welcome back, everybody. If you haven't joined us before, this is PIER, which is the Positivity and Innovation for Edmonton's Reopening series. It's hosted here by Homestead Coworking, and we're very excited today because we actually have one of our own, but also somebody here to talk to us about something that's very, very timely. So we're very excited to talk about some health advocacy and some very, very cool things I will get into in a minute, just explaining all of the cool things that Kirstin's been up to with her own business as well. I did just want to give everybody a refresher of what the series kind of entails, what it's about, and really where the series came from was the lack of basically positivity that we saw as soon as everything started to shut down. And we wanted to be able to bring some very unique and very interesting people from different walks of life in order to show you what they've been doing with their businesses, to see what's been successful, to see what hasn't been successful, as well as to see how we can support each other. So that's where this series kind of gained its roots from. But with that, we'd also like to start with our land acknowledgement. So Homestead and myself honors and thanks the many First Nations on whose historical and traditional lands Edmonton was founded. This includes the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, and Nakota Sioux. We acknowledge and embrace the fact that we were on the traditional land of Treaty 6 territory and the traditional Métis homelands of Region 4. We acknowledge the diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory for centuries, from First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and now settlers from around the world. We do this to create awareness that we are all treaty people and to show recognition and respect for Indigenous people and the traditional territories on which we live, work, and play. We take our responsibilities with Indigenous people seriously, and together we call upon all of our collective honored traditions and spirits to work in building a great city for today and future generations. Homestead holds the values of inclusiveness and diversity deep within the founding of this space, and this series was created with those same intentions. So as we mentioned before, this is something that we like to carry through the entire series. So if you're just joining us for the first time, we're glad that you're able to hear that from us. So today, there's a lot to talk about with Kirstin, that's for sure. It's beyond her background in biochemistry, working as a patient advocate, and also working out of a co-working space during a pandemic. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so I'm so excited to introduce Kirstin Veugelers, who no doubt is a familiar face if you are a Homestead member. She has gone through quite a journey, founding her own business and working on what comes next in the healthcare world without being like your typical healthcare person. So we're very, very excited. Kirstin holds a PhD in biochemistry, like I said, that's from the University of Alberta. And outside of Homestead and her business, she's also a very accomplished vocalist. We're very honored to have her here with us today, as well as the lady can knit. You should see some of the very cool projects she's had. So I'm sure we'll get into some fun stuff there, but feel free to take it away, Kirstin.
Thank you, Madison. This is a real honor to be part of the PIER series today, so thank you very much for inviting me. I have a few slides that I would like. Oh, my mouse is not showing up where I wanted it to.
Being there.
Yeah, right. Let's go to that one. Yes. So as I share about what I do and what I've been through, my business is called Navigate Your Health, and I offer personal patient navigation services. And this fits under a larger term umbrella. Most people who do what I do call themselves professional health advocates. And we are basically independent consultants that provide support services in the realm of healthcare. And usually when I tell people that I do this personal patient navigation, or I'm a professional health advocate, the first question is, what is that? I've never heard of this before. And then the next question is, how did you end up in this sphere? Especially since it's not something that, you know, if you've never heard of it, then how did you choose this as a career? So I'm going to answer both of those questions. We'll start with the I've never heard of this before question first. What is it? And as in my business, my missions are that my patient clients, they experience, first of all, empowerment. So when somebody isn't getting the answers that they need, they feel like they don't have enough information, or they feel like the information is just above them, I'm there to provide that clarity. So they get that sense of ownership over the information. They have the ability to make decisions that are right for them from then on. The second thing that I aim for them to experience is advocacy. That they feel like their voice is heard, that their story, their priorities are part of the decision-making process, instead of just sort of a blanket, this is what we're going to do, decision made for them. And the third goal that I hold is that the people I work with experience peace of mind. That comes in part from feeling empowered. It comes in part from experiencing advocacy. But the other thing that happens is when you're facing a major crisis, there is trauma, there is grief, there are all kinds of things that are going on. And so as you're sitting with that loss, as you're sitting with that grief, I hold space for that. And accompany people on that journey. And it's amazing how important that is to creating peace of mind, even in the midst of crisis and the immense stress that comes with it. So that's what I'm trying to achieve. But to give you a little bit more understanding of what this really means, some example services of what I provide and what most professional health advocates offer are things like system navigation and case management. So when you've got your case, what are the next steps in progressing your case forward? Making sure that the health information is clear. So making sure you understand the diagnosis as well as how you're going to treat it. Or if you're in a case where we can prevent something from happening, what's your best case scenario of doing that? So giving you that valuable information, that's part of that empowerment piece, as well as connecting people to support options. So helping them to research different support options that are available, both publicly as well as privately, to make sure that they have the tools, they have the support to move forward in their journey and feel really stabilized. I also, what I specifically specialize in is particularly support at medical appointments. So when people go to attend a medical appointment, I offer to be there as well. These days, maybe not necessarily in person, it might just be virtually, but nonetheless, I am there as an extra set of ears. I am there also as an extra voice. And that's part of that empowerment piece, helping to gather the information, both in terms of making sure that we record it well. So as little information is, or as much information is retained, little is lost, is where I was going with that, as possible, as well as we ask better questions. And as well as doing research support. As Madison said, my background is in biochemistry, a research setting. And so that's a natural extension for me to be able to do that research, whether it is looking at resources in the community or looking at information to find out, okay, this is what I've been presented, what more are we learning? Because when it comes to the health sphere, we are always learning, we are always updating our information. And maybe standard practices are best practice right now, but there may be additional layers that we can add through research. And one other thing that I have done on an occasional basis is a little bit of peer coaching as well. As somebody who lives with anxiety, that's one area where sometimes people find that they want a little bit of additional support. I'm not a trained counselor by any right, but for somebody who is looking for a listening ear and somebody to reflect back what they're experiencing, to help give them perspective and maybe a couple of tips on next steps that they can take and support them in those positive steps. Those are the sorts of things that I can do. Now, I also want to highlight on this slide, I've got these grouped in a couple of different columns. On the left-hand side, that's often the sorts of services that you would also expect to receive when you are in the public system. So even within healthcare, these are some of the things that a lot of different professions would offer you. That said, when you bring me on, it's more of a concierge support. You get as much support as you need, tailored to your time, tailored to your needs, tailored to your level of understanding. It's the things on the right-hand side, the support at medical appointments, the research support, as well as the peer coaching. Those are much more characteristic of the private services of professional health advocates. So that's a little bit more about what it is that I do. So now I'd like to share a little bit more about how it is that I got into this, because yeah, this is not, if you've never heard of this before, it's not the sort of career that you ever dream of entering in to start with. This idea was I first conceived it when I was looking at a career shift. I started off in research. To be honest, when I was in high school, I had the opportunity to tour the biochemistry department at the University of Alberta. And I was inspired when I learned that there were structural biochemists there who were studying an enzyme from a virus, and they were trying to design a drug that would fit into the active site of the virus in order to try and help or prevent that infection. So this was for one of the different types of viruses that cause the common cold. And as soon as I heard that, my brain just exploded, and I was ready to dive down that pathway. So going into university, that was where I was aiming. I wanted to go into research. I wanted to change the world with what I could help the medical field to understand and improve global health. And so that's what I did for many, many years. I first got my undergrad in biochem. I decided to stay at the U of A, which especially at the time was a very well regarded department, especially within Canada. I think it's still very, very highly regarded. So I studied a branch of the immune system in the lab where I did my PhD. And then I ended up continuing on at the U of A in the Department of Medical Microbiology and Immunology. A woman who had been a postdoc in the lab where I did my PhD, she had gone on and started her own lab where she was studying pox viruses. And she asked me if I would come and continue my postdoctoral studies under her, and thus studying pox viruses. So for about 4 years or so after my PhD, I was in her lab and studying viruses. So it was at the end of those 4 years when I decided, you know what, as excited as I was, as much as I still love viruses, as much as there are things that I love about this doesn't work for me anymore. And a lot of it was more on the personal level because I had a young family at the time. My daughter was around 4, 5, 6. My son was born shortly after I started my postdoc. And the reality is that research is a very demanding career. It eats up a lot of time. And those who are successful often invest their lives in it. And that wasn't what I envisioned for myself and my family. And so I knew that I needed to pivot. And my question at the time was, what can I do with the skills that I already have? I didn't want to go back and get re-educated. I wanted to use what I had already gained. And so it was at that time, as I started taking stock, where this idea came up. But at the time, the barriers that seemed to be there were, I have no idea how to approach this. I don't have, I've never been an entrepreneur either. There's so many massive questions on how to even approach this that it didn't seem accessible. So instead, I went the route of teaching. I became a university educator. And I did that for a number of years, but this question continued in my mind for many, many years. And it was about 7 or 8 years later when I discovered that I had gained more of the skills that I needed in order to do this. Even though I had been a good communicator, I became a better lay communicator and teacher. But then in addition to that, I also had experienced my own health journey that I think largely equipped me. In addition, when I started doing the research seriously into this particular field, I also discovered that, hey, even though this was an idea I had conceived of out of my own brain, the thought that, hey, wouldn't somebody, we all live in a very, very busy society. I could imagine somebody who is trying to take care of their parents, trying to work take care of their kids and get their parents to their medical appointments. Wouldn't they love it if somebody could step in and take their parents to their medical appointments and keep them part of the story, part of the decision-making process? Wouldn't that be a great service to offer? That was kind of where I had started. And kind of lost my train of thought, apologies there, but circling back, I discovered that there were other people who had also found that this was something that needed to be done. There were guidelines in an organization called the Alliance of Professional Health Advocates. So realizing that there were tools, there were other people's experiences that I could build on, I finally thought, yeah, I can actually do this. But a bit more about my story, because that's such an important piece, the health side. Where I ended up was this full-on crisis. I didn't know if I was actually going to live at one point. I was constantly losing weight. I kept eating. My doctor said eat more, and it didn't seem to want to stick. I got to the point where I was starting to drift below what is considered a healthy weight. And so at that point in time, seeing that trend and not being able to get a control on it, I'm sitting there some days with my 1-year-old, my 2-year-old on my lap, and not even necessarily feeling confident that I will be there to watch my son grow. So that was a very, very scary place. And my doctors couldn't even figure out what it was that was causing this. I didn't have any clear direction. I was spinning my wheels. I was still working. I was trying to parent. I'm spending all this time trying to sort this out. It was an overwhelming, angering sort of situation. And I'm happy to say that today, I actually live very, very well. Eventually I did find the right path, but it did take an awful lot of time. I went through a period of trauma. I went through a great deal of stress and had to go through a great deal of healing as well. Because even though I live really well, it's not like my condition is cured. I've just learned how to live with it well so that I can still live a very full life. And so with that comes a great deal of grief and loss that you still have to go through. And yet at the same time, discovering that there are new gifts that still make life very, very fulfilling. So while that loss is still there, that grief is still there, I still live a very, very satisfying life. And I'm actually I feel in some ways that I'm probably better off because of the lifestyle changes that I had to implement. So I launched my practice in 2017 and started building momentum until about the middle of last year. And then for some reason, things just started to slowly peter out. And so in November, I got to the point where I found I needed to take a step back and pivot a little bit, because I was finding that I myself in this business was a little bit unstable. And so that was when Tegan stepped in and invited me to become a part-time member of the staff at Homestead in order to help me first find stability for my family as I tried to contemplate what a pivot would look like for Navigate Your Health, and just sort of keep Navigate Your Health, slowly petering along, hopefully sustaining at a minimum level so that I would be able to launch off from there and continue to grow. And then enter COVID. And so at that point in time, it's one of the things that I had been working on that became a really, really important part of my COVID journey was I've been working with a couple of other professional health advocates. This is, as I've said, this is something that most people don't know about. But that said, there are 30, 40, 50 of us across Canada who are launching similar practices, or some who have actually been in practice for 5, 10 years. And so we are organizing the Canadian Alliance of Health Advocates in order to create some standards of practice, as well as to help promote awareness so that people don't feel like, where have you been all my life? This starts to become a regular part of Canadian awareness that this is something, these are private services that are available to support people when they are in crisis. Also during COVID, I started doing more listening, partly to myself and partly to other people's conversations. And there were more conversations that people were having around critical illness decisions. And so I started to talk more about how do you plan for those kinds of emergencies in advance so that you eliminate the greatest trauma of those very critical incidents. And the reason that those conversations were bubbling up is, what if I got COVID now? Particularly, what if my aging parents got COVID now? What decisions should we be making on their behalf? The level of risk, goes up as soon as there's infection in community. It's no longer simply, what if I suddenly had a heart attack? What if I had a fall? What if dementia sets in? Those kinds of questions that simmer in the background. Now there's an imminent risk. And so this became a great opportunity to step up those kinds of conversations. And as well, part of COVID was making sure that my community was provided for, particularly after the crisis first hit and there was a great deal of isolation. And how do I secure food? How do I secure all the things that I need? And so that was a big part of my COVID journey. But at the same time, for me, uniquely, the fact that I had kind of put everything on hold, this became a place where I could just prioritize making sure that my family was stable. And that was a big part of it, was making sure that we were stable in our overall well-being, that we didn't have to worry about finances. And so that also became a part of my journey became processing some of the grief and shame that were bubbling up around the fact that my original model for how my business was working, it just wasn't working for me. And so the main message that I have for I guess our listeners is that it was a huge win in being able to find stability and happiness, even if it meant having to shift my focus away from where my dream was a few years ago, just taking some time to rest, to learn, and to find new potential paths. That in and of itself has been a real gain for me. So even though Navigate Your Health is still sort of puttering along very slowly, I feel like this has been a very, very worthwhile. I've still gained a lot from this COVID experience, and I believe that Navigate Your Health is still going to come out stronger on the other side.
I would definitely agree with that. It's like you said, it's brought a lot of attention to these plans that we didn't necessarily know we had to make. I know you've been fantastic with me, just even talking about one of my friends, their father is on a ventilator, and just even what that means, what that could be. And I probably owe you a couple bucks, at least lunch. But it is something that, like, if that was my dad and I needed the support, I don't think I would have known that your business existed if I hadn't have joined Homestead with the private part of it, because I think we assume as Canadians we have everything, right?
Indeed. And we do have an awful lot. But at the same time, what we do find that there are certain gaps in the system, especially as we deal with capacity issues and sometimes not necessarily funneling funds into what patients might find the most useful, funds or time. We get so focused sometimes on dealing with the physical health aspects, but there's just so much more to it. I mean, they try and acknowledge it by having social workers in hospitals, by having case managers to help navigate people through the system. But there are even times when that doesn't necessarily work out quite as well as people hope. My very, very first case, the one where I discovered, I have more tools than I think I do. I decided to just, when I started exploring this, it kind of landed in my lap, the opportunity to work with somebody who had cancer. She had a patient navigator through the Cross Cancer Institute assigned to her. But when she went to her with her particular questions, which weren't necessarily the ones that would go down your standard medical procedures, she was interested in alternative procedures and options and things like that. She felt like her questions were kind of brushed aside. And so she felt alienated very, very early on, even though the help was offered. And that was where I was actually able to change the direction around, was by taking her questions seriously, and providing the extra research and rationale behind making an informed decision.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because I know a lot of people look for alternatives these days for sure. But it's it's very interesting to hear your personal story, and thank you so much for sharing that with us, because that is something that's very deeply personal and has affected your whole life, and to say the least. And that's something that I see with a lot of people. Their businesses mean everything to them, and there's always a reason. And for you, it's a very, very big reason, that's for sure. And
100%.
it's, I just find it so interesting that you can take something that most people would think is like a bad thing, technically, and then bring it to not only help yourself, but to help other people. And that's a really, really nice thing to see.
Yeah, and I would definitely agree. In the midst of it, I would often tell people I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. I wouldn't wish this for anybody, to go through the challenges and strains that I went through. But the reality is that people go through that all the time. The gift is that when you come through healing, it doesn't erase the experience that you've had, but at least it allows you to come to some kind of a purpose, if you will, that you can hopefully try and change what that experience is for other people and make it less traumatic, and certainly at the very least less alone, which is why when I was choosing my tagline, I decided that I wanted it to be, you don't have to journey alone.
That's really, really nice. Yeah, I know we've spoken a lot about isolation throughout the whole series, and if it's isolation and illness, I that can be very, very, very awful to go through. I know even our past speaker, Linda, has gone through 6 years of unexplained infertility, and she just posted a new blog post explaining that this is where they're at, and nobody knows anything. So
Yeah,
it's always interesting to see what people have behind their business stories, and being you're not alone in that. Once you start sharing it, there are typically a bunch of other people who have it, and or at least parts that they get, right?
absolutely. And even if they don't match it detail per detail, the heart feeling, the experience of that aloneness, of seeing the struggle, that's immediately relatable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so important to have that support, that community around you who hears you, who sees you where you are.
Definitely. And that's one thing, the question that I ask everybody, which I'm sure you're prepared for, is the community aspect, right? So with Edmonton being what it is, being where you're from, being born and raised here, you Alberta grad double,
Yeah.
what in your experience though made you want to start a business here?
um, I mean, largely it is just that as a family, we decided to stay here, and so that it kind of ended up being a default thing. That said, we chose to be here because we felt those deep community roots. And so when you feel like you're surrounded by a community that supports you, that lifts you up, that enriches your life, then why wouldn't you want to stay there? And so that all comes through personal connections that I had first established through my childhood. My husband immigrated from the Netherlands so that we could get married. And through the connections I gave him, it also added to his quality of life as well. And it just created a rich life for our family. And so we are here because Edmonton has given us that opportunity to feel safe, to feel held, to feel lifted up.
Oh, that's amazing to hear. Yeah, because obviously, like I knew that your husband was from the Netherlands, so it is always interesting to see when you kind of have options.
Yeah.
that you choose Edmonton. So
Yeah, not to say, I mean, I did look at doing a postdoc in the Netherlands, but in the end, some circumstance, it didn't quite work out. And in the end, I ended up going with the postdoc here, and it just kind of held us in a space that we already felt was home.
yeah, definitely. I know the Netherlands and Canada have such a close relationship too. So it's one of those things that I think either way, it probably would have gone perfectly well. Just would have been more tulips over there, right?
Absolutely, and more rain.
Yes. You could always move to Vancouver, right?
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
yeah, no, I find that very interesting, and that's a really nice and touching spot, because I know when you were doing your initial tour of Homestead, because you joined as a member, you were
Yeah.
like, oh, I know that person, and
Yes,
just seeing
100%.
familiar faces is something that definitely would kind of help out with that, I'd say, starting the
100%.
journey.
Yeah. I mean, I was looking for a co-working site, which is how I stumbled across Homestead. There was a lot going for it even before I toured it, and then I met somebody who I knew through personal connections, and yeah, absolutely. As soon as I saw that, it was like, okay, this feels like a safe space.
Yeah, that's kind of the fun thing, is you never know um, who knows each other in Edmonton, because even we had a new member join us a couple weeks ago, and they happen to know somebody who just moved in upstairs on the fourth floor.
Indeed.
And all of these little things, like even with Vince and Jeff, when we were talking about how they all knew Linda. So it
Yeah,
is the biggest small town
absolutely.
that you'll get. So I definitely feel you there.
Yeah.
I do have a question kind of about this space, because, like I said, I didn't know anything about this before meeting you, but with joining what is typically seen as like healthcare as like not a nurse or a counselor, that can
Mm.
kind of be intimidating, I would imagine. Did you experience anything where people were like, wait, but you studied viruses, or
Uh, not really, because I mean, while I don't necessarily know all of the lingo, I do have a very high end uh, understanding of a lot of biology, particularly at the molecular level, and that can often enhance conversations and understanding, especially if it's not an area of expertise. If I have a little bit of time to go and do a little bit of research, so I will admit that the vast majority of professional health advocates come from the nursing sphere, as far as we've seen so far. That said, there are many lay people who are coming to this profession with similar stories, not necessarily that they have, say, a biochemistry background, but they've had their own struggles in the health system, and they figure that the experience that they gain can enhance or support another patient so that they don't have the same struggles.
for sure. So you would say then, like, the PhD definitely is coming in handy.
I would say so, yes. That and the experience in teaching students. I think that was very instrumental in helping me. I have to admit, when I first started teaching, one of the first evaluations that I got was, she's clearly very smart, but I don't quite understand what she's talking about. And so getting that feedback from a student, was hard to take, but it certainly made me more aware of how I needed to change the way that I was speaking, that I needed to bring my education down a few notches in order for other people to understand.
Yeah, which isn't always the easiest thing to do. I know, especially for people like doctors who don't typically have a lot of time,
Yeah,
for them to explain something in layman's terms
yeah.
sometimes takes longer than us Googling it, I feel like.
Absolutely. And then sometimes, and then the risk of Google is, while it might give you an accurate representation, sometimes it can take you down the worst case scenario rabbit hole, or just take you down the wrong fears. And that is the biggest risk there.
I've definitely found that when I've Googled something and then I'm like, it always ends with like something that is very, very wrong, right? Whether it be like, oh, you're going to have like a heart attack in 4 minutes because your foot hurts, or like it's always some form of cancer, right? On
Yeah,
WebMD, I'm pretty
yeah.
sure. It always leads to that.
Yeah, or there will, it might show up as a potential cause, but of course that's the place where we go.
Well, yeah, and if you have any like inclinations towards being like slightly hypochondriac, that's where you're gonna go,
Oh,
100%.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So it is nice to have somebody be like, well, no, maybe stop at tonsillitis. Don't
Yeah.
keep going down.
Yeah. We'll explore these things first.
Mhm.
We'll rule that out, or hopefully not rule it out. We'll find a more
Yeah.
likely explanation.
Well, and that's one of the things that we've seen even on television when they talk about the not knowing is the
Yeah.
hardest part, right?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Because when you don't know, it's hard to plan. And that was the reality for my life when I was going through my health woes, because I didn't even necessarily know day to day what I needed to be doing differently in order to feel better. And certainly with COVID, that's been the biggest struggle as well. We learn little bits, little packets, but we cannot make these long-term plans because we have no idea how long this is going to be around. We are still learning details about how this virus transmits, and it's frustrating. And I think at this point in time, the most useful thing we can do is say, yes, it is frustrating, and that's normal, and I don't feel okay with it. And that's okay because it's the normal human response. And just leave space for that while also trying to live your best life at the same time.
Yeah, I know that's we've had a couple chats that have basically just been like, this isn't okay. We're not all right now, and we
Yeah.
just need to say that.
Yes, we have definitely had those conversations, and
Yeah,
it's useful to be able to say that.
for sure. And like sort of outside of your echo chamber, right?
Yeah.
Because we follow all the same people on social media, we talk to all of our friends, and then with us not going out into the world interacting and necessarily meeting new people, you're just hearing the same people. So when it's nice when you're like, you can kind of have that with like, oh well, we've never talked about this before, but we're both feeling the same way.
Absolutely. It is nice to find out that you're not crazy, and again, back to you're not alone.
Yeah, definitely. Um, so with that, dealing with like aging parents or
Yeah.
family members, definitely not the easiest thing to deal with. I mean, like I said, I've come to you and I'm not the easiest to deal with, so I can't even imagine if it was something a little bit more substantial. Um, with that, are people just looking for guides through this, or are they looking for somebody to help them find a care home? Like, what typically do you end up kind of talking about with the aging population?
It depends entirely because each case is individual. Sometimes some of the people who are coming to me are what we sometimes refer to as elder orphans. They may be elderly, they didn't have any children, they may or may not have a spouse, or even if they do have a spouse, there's clear signs that they're going to outlive their spouse, and so in the end they don't have that support system around them apart from their peers who are all in that same precarious situation. And so being able to help them figure out, or at least so that they know they have a solution in their back pocket, that when something happens, they'll have somebody to go to help them get through the system. Sometimes it's people who are definitely deep in crisis. Those ones are definitely much harder to deal with because as soon as we're in crisis because of certain not moving points within our healthcare system and the way long-term care is set up, it often leads to real challenges in just trying to get those basic needs met. And then sometimes people are really proactive and they say, we are anticipating this being a problem. Can you help us to formulate a plan, or just to figure out, what are our options moving forward? Can we, look at what different types of housing might look like? And then sometimes it's also, I've had one client where she was already in seniors, not a seniors residence, but she's living with minor assistance. And all of her offspring live across the globe. And so just having somebody locally who can attend appointments and report back to them so they can still be involved. So
Yeah,
it really ranges across the board.
for sure. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with health, right? Is there's no one size fits all solution. I know, speaking with the aging population and seniors especially, it's been tricky during COVID, as we knew that they were the highest risk
Yes.
of the population. But we've seen quite a disproportionate, if I'm going to say it correctly, amount of loss of life with seniors and in care homes, especially, and even within Edmonton, we've seen quite a large amount of that. Obviously, very loaded question, so don't worry, we're not going to submit this if we run for mayor. But is there something that is this where that preparation and those planning sessions and being proactive could have helped better prepare us for this? Or do you think, like, it's a once in 100-year pandemic, like who would have seen this coming?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think that families have been advocating for a long time, and advocates for senior wellness have been advocating for a long time, saying that our senior population is underserved, whether it's looking at those care home situations or whether you're looking at seniors who are trying to age in place in their own home. And then along with that, the support for caregivers as well, making sure that they have the resources in order to help their aging parents live their best lives. I don't necessarily know that making a preliminary plan as an individual family would necessarily have equipped us any better, because the reality is within the care homes, it was a ticking time bomb, largely because of the infrastructure that is missing, sometimes a lack of personnel, sometimes that transient nature of the personnel, as well as the fact that in many settings, they have more than one person in one room. And so that's where the ticking time bomb goes off. But even within the community, we see people who are supporting their loved ones, and they were just barely getting by on respite support before COVID. And then when COVID came along, those kinds of respite services were often withdrawn, meaning that the caregiver became the sole caregiver 24/7. This was a job that they had no matter how tired they were. And even before COVID, many of them were already at wit's end.
Yeah, and normally, like, you would also be able to go to these appointments. And I know one of the first things they were like, nope, you can't come to appointments. You can't go to seniors homes. You can't, like, they locked everything down. Even with your choir, you were supposed to perform at a seniors
Absolutely.
home. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, in that case, my plan was, okay, if I have a case where somebody wants me to be involved, at least I have the option of using the phone. If somebody is hearing impaired, of course, that's not necessarily an ideal situation, but you go with the flow. You provide whatever options there are. If there was a case to make for having me there at an appointment, that would be something that we would address as a sort of a case-by-case basis. But the standard approach that I was going to take, and that I still recommend at this stage in the game, especially if I am dealing with a high-risk population, is let me attend virtually. If it's really, really important for you to have me there, we will take every precaution to make sure that it's still a safe experience. But my first recommendation would be a distanced consult.
yeah, so this has almost kind of helped with that as well. Like, a lot of people have had to learn technology very, very quickly, or a number of other things. So maybe this has also helped with transitioning part of your business to that digital, so you don't have to necessarily run around to every single appointment.
Absolutely. Appointments, even webinars, instead of going to senior centers in order to give educational presentations. It certainly saves me some time. Even networking is done over Zoom now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was very interested to, like, hearing about how people do networking over Zoom, and I know you're quite involved in the women entrepreneurs space in Edmonton. And that's been something that you've kept up, which is really great.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see that pivot from that in person to that you just make it work so that people can still connect personally, and it's been great to see how everybody has made that happen. Although at the same time, we are starting to hear about that webinar fatigue, and how people are like, I just want to see a real face. I want to be able to feel their presence. That said, when you need to make the best choice concerning the whole of you, um, even Zoom is a remarkable substitute, or a voice on the phone. It's the thing that matters most is that personal connection, and I've experienced that healing capacity as well.
Mm-hmm. I know we've kind of mentioned this as well, separately, but with the community that is hard of hearing, which
Yeah.
typically you are serving, the mask situation has been pretty difficult. I know there's been some places that have developed masks with a clear mouthpiece, but I haven't seen that go as wide as it could be. Do you think that that might be something that starts to pick up steam now that we have bylaws in Calgary and Edmonton mandating mask use?
I suspect that will happen. That's definitely something that I've been saying to myself, okay, now it's time to actively invest in that, because for some people that is definitely a concern. And I think one of the biggest advantages of having a professional health advocate at a medical appointment is that ability to make sure you're gaining more information. So just going back to the question, that ability to gain information, it means if I can't speak to you and you can't receive it, we're not setting you up for success. So yes, in serving that population, if we want to really be able to help them succeed and meet them where they are, I think we all need to be aware of that and resource ourselves accordingly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tricky. Like we both spoke, our dads both wear hearing aids. It's even getting them to do that originally, difficult fight. But yeah, even then, I do find sometimes that he still has trouble because he didn't realize how much he was reading people's lips.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
yeah.
And that's where having that clear mouthpiece is really an advantage and is a service for those people. And so that's where we can all be just that much more loving and supportive of one another.
Yeah, so do you see, I know those face masks are also a
Yeah.
possibility, the clear ones, for
Yeah.
people on the podcast who can't see me motioning at my face. Um,
Yeah.
do you think that's a good solution? Because I know it has a big opening at the bottom.
Right. I think the ones that have the big opening at the bottom, the general intent is that you then still wear a mouth cover, because we're trying to make sure that those droplets, the respiratory droplets that come from your mouth and your nose, aren't escaping. And they, as soon as you've got that big open ventilation at the bottom, you are losing that level of protection. I have seen comment by an actual expert in the field. This was on a recent CBC article where she was feeling that it was probably okay. I'm still a little bit hesitant myself about that idea. I have also seen some variations on face masks where the whole mask is actually transparent and there's a tight fitting around the nose, but I think those are typically reserved for health professionals. But if you're going to go for a large clear thing, I think that would be the more secure way. So yeah, it's all a challenge.
Mm-hmm, definitely. Yeah, and that's kind of been an interesting thing too, is there's so much to talk about with COVID that
Yeah.
people have been, I'm sure, talking to you about COVID, but I know you've been speaking about pivoting this
Yeah,
prior to this, or looking at these non-for-profit models, or
absolutely.
just kind of adjusting your business regardless. So has COVID really impacted that, or was this always something that you were kind of focused on anyway?
Well, this is a multi-layered answer. I would have to say that as I started to make the decision towards pivoting, that was sort of top of mind that I wanted to go there. To be totally honest, when I started my business, it was a question that I first addressed. And so as I was going through the checklists of all the things that I needed to learn to become an entrepreneur, because that was one of the bigger barriers for me. At the time when I saw what it would mean to become a not-for-profit, I thought, oh, that's bigger than I want to take on. I've got enough of a learning curve right now. But when I came to that point where I thought I needed to pivot, I needed to acknowledge for myself, and I've started to re-solidify that again in the last few weeks, that I think part of the challenge is why I was seeing some of the drop-off is that I was hearing voices of, well, this isn't affordable because it's not publicly available. You have to pay these private service fees. And at my very, very core, that's something that I hold as an essential value. And so they were just speaking to something that I already believed. And so it started to manifest itself that this wasn't the right path for me. I still don't entirely know what this looks like. I'd like it to take on some form of a social enterprise, so it's not just charity work. But there's still lots of exploration, lots of conversation that needs to happen before this turns into that reality.
Yeah, that's super exciting to go through, though. I can imagine, like, looking at all the different pieces now that you've tried one.
Yeah.
Feels maybe a little bit more, like you were saying, less intimidating when you're first starting out.
Absolutely. And it was a couple of things. It's a combination of, I've gained a lot of things in the last 3 years in terms of experience that has brought me so much further in terms of being an entrepreneur, but also realizing that through being involved in my own church, being involved in my choir, and now trying to set up that Canadian Association of Health Advocates. Those are all nonprofit organizations, and especially being involved in the church and the choir, it's like, hey, wait a minute, I already know more about that sphere than I think I do. And so discovering that I'm more resourced than I think I am made it seem that much more attainable.
Yeah, I definitely think that's something that most entrepreneurs suffer from, is they think I need to go learn this, I need to go learn this, and they forget what's already inside. So
Absolutely.
it's awesome to see that you're like, no, wait, I do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also having such a great community around me also makes a huge difference, because with the variety of connections that I have, including, we'll give out a shout out to Heidi, who I see is in observation today, a great source of information about nonprofit organizations, has been feeding me little bits of information along the way that are helping me to rearrange the structure for myself, for the choir, for the Canadian Association. Those are all areas where I'm seeing, like, hey, I am actually learning something, and through my connections, I can contribute to bettering other organizations as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of been a theme that I've seen, is like, you want to take what you've learned and make things better for other people. So it is, there's definitely some fun stuff coming up for Navigate Your Health. I can definitely tell.
Thanks. I hope so. That's my intention.
Yeah, and that's the first step, right? Put your intentions out into the world and then manifest it. That's what we're hearing these days.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we've learned quite a lot today about an industry that not many people know too much about. So I want to thank you especially for giving us kind of the tour of what you do.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, it's always our pleasure. I think the more that we can hear from people like you, it's just the more inspiring it is, right? Because you never know where you'll find a niche or a need, and sometimes it finds you.
That's true. At least that was my experience, for sure.
Definitely. So I want to thank you again so much for being with us, Kirstin. If people want to check you out, they should head to your website, which is navigateyourhealth.ca.
That's
Right?
right. And I also have a Facebook page for Navigate Your Health, and I can also be found on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Yeah. So definitely check her out, send her a follow, send her a request if you're looking for any services there as well. She's always down to listen to people's what they're looking for as well. So
Absolutely.
we're always around, and if it's giving her some time to herself, I can definitely do that. I know we share an office technically, but I can give it. Don't worry. But it's super fun to actually hear a little bit more and dig into your business, because it's not something that we often get to share too much. So I really, really appreciate that you took this time today and that we could have this. Like I said, definitely make sure to check out Navigate Your Health, because it is going places, and now is the time to get in on the good side with Kirstin. That's for sure. All right. Well, before we head off today, I do want to thank everybody who attended. I also want to give a shout out. If you're also doing webinars, you will find maybe you've left yourself on mute a couple times during these. So we actually got these sent over. They're a little you're on mute sign, and on the other side it says thank you. So these are actually made by Punch Card, which is a local Edmonton business as well. And all of the profits, the proceeds from buying these, they're a 2-pack for $5, goes to Camp Firefly. So a very, very worthy cause here in Edmonton. So keeping some good local charity going. So if that's something you're interested in, it's on mute.punchcard.io, or you can just search You're on Mute with Punchcard. We have to keep the charity going beyond the Oilers 50-50. So I definitely just wanted to share that with you guys, especially because it's pretty fun to hold this up during a meeting. And I maybe got it just for Alicia. But I will see you all next week, and I'm so excited, and we can't wait to share even more fun with you. Thank you so much for joining us again, Kirstin, and we can't wait to hear what's next.
Thank you, Madison. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.